It's week 11. Let's get it. Here at the Voice of College Football on a Thursday night. Appreciate you stopping by. Don't just stop by. Say hi in the chat. Leave any kind of comments or questions there. Also, the call-in line has been posted as well, both on X/Twitter and right here in the chat. Things are getting serious. If you are looking at the shelf right here, which usually has absolutely no meaning, just random selection of helmets, whatever landed, wherever, that's what it typically is. But as you see, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, don't know why Miami's there, Texas, Clemson's there. Oh, some other helmets showed up. But that's right. We did our segment with Steve Merrill from Wager Talk. So we did our betting segment. So you can check out the wager segments that we are posting on the team channels. And of course, the Under the Radar selection exclusive right here at the Voice of College Football for you Patreon members and YouTube channel members with the premium membership. So you get your Under the Radar selection. So please check that out. I did notice, so my point is somewhat compromised here, that we had nothing but SEC helmets here, because shortly after the show's concluded here, I will finish editing our SEC championship scenarios. So we will go through those. SEC championship scenarios, we're posting a video. We did the Big Ten that posted at like midnight last night, not by choice or not intentionally, but I kind of flubbed that one up. So I got done editing the Big Ten championship scenarios, and I was going to release that early this morning and schedule it to post early this morning, and I accidentally just let her fly. And so that was out at like 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning this past morning, but it's out there for you as well. Big Ten championship scenarios, a little bit more cut and dry, but still fairly involved. The possibilities of Oregon, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana. And if we want to play it on down the line, yes, Oregon has not clinched a Big Ten championship berth. It appears to be all but clinched based on being 6-0, rolling, and then also playing the likes of Maryland, Wisconsin, and Washington the next 3 weeks. But we also look at, even if Oregon would in some way falter, it depends on who they would lose to. So please check out the video again that we posted earlier today involving the Big Ten championship race. And again, we are going to post a video as soon as we get done here that I have to finish editing with all the SEC scenarios. Not all the scenarios, because there's 4 weeks left to play. And so we've got 9 teams in the SEC with either 1 or 2 losses. So nobody could possibly go through all the scenarios, not even a mathematician. And that video would be like 3 days long. But we went through the major scenarios in the SEC. We ran through all the tiebreakers. And you've got Georgia and Texas A&M at 5-1, Tennessee at 4-1, Texas LSU 3-1. So you've got a 5-way tie for first place in the loss column in the SEC. You got Vandy, Ole Miss, and Bama with 2 losses, as well as Mizzou. 9 teams in the SEC with 1 or 2 losses. And again, we go through all the head-to-head matchups. And what I found rather disturbing about the rest of the season in the SEC is that you would think with 9 teams in play, 9, most of these teams have 3 games left out of 8. Some have 4. That out of 9 teams, that you would think that they would be running into each other constantly over the last 4 weeks of the season, right? 9 teams out of 16. After this weekend, there are only 4 games involving these 9 contenders. 4. So anyway, we break it all down, and that video is going to be released soon. And again, the Big Ten scenarios as well. We'll go through the schedule of Week 11, and there are going to be some upsets. So let's find the upsets. That's what we do here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you being here. And this being a Thursday night, we also have the Michigan call-in show coming up at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And that, surprisingly, is on the Michigan channel. So the Michigan call-in show on Thursday. Of course, the Michigan live shows go Tuesday and Thursday, folks. Tuesday and Thursday, I see our buddy John D'Adamo in the chat. Tuesday and Thursday for the Michigan live shows. And I will not go through our schedule because it's ever expanding here at the Voice of College Football, but I will highlight some of the undervalued shows because they've just started, some of the startups that you may not be aware of, because we do have a Rutgers channel. Therefore, we've got a Rutgers show. We've got an Ole Miss channel, Ole Miss show. We also do the post game for Ole Miss and Rutgers and Indiana. Of course, a hot time for Indiana to jump on the bandwagon and find out what Jeffrey's talking about on the Indiana show. That's on Tuesday nights. I post our entire network schedule each and every morning or late night, so you can see it every time with the links right there. You can follow every show on down the line. Most of the time. I don't think I did that today because on Thursday we only have one show. Besides my show here, the post-game show, I believe we only have one show on Thursdays. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesdays are loaded. But Thursday, just the one show, the Michigan show, the call-in show, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Before we look at the schedule, hey, why not? Disputed National Champions. Here it is. Yeah, we're proud of this book. It's a great read. This is not War and Peace, folks. This is not going to get a Pulitzer Prize by any stretch. This is not any great literature here. So it's for my crowd. But it's pretty clear, pretty well put together. And we are going through the 1990s. Why the 1990s? Two reasons. Number one, I consider it to be the most formative and impactful decade in college football in regards to transforming the championship formula. Number one, most importantly. Secondly, I just figured, look at my audience, look at the age of my audience, look at what would be considered for somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s to be the golden age of college football. We were going to select one decade. Let's start with the 1990s. But again, I started with the 1990s because of the poll era being in play starting in 1990. The Bowl Coalition, if you forgot about that or didn't live through it, was the attempt to get 1 and 2 together, which actually worked most of the time, even though the Pac-10 and the Big Ten did not sign the contract and did not take part. So the Bowl Coalition brought together 1 and 2 in 1992, 93, 94, 95. I'm sorry, not 1994, 92, 3, and 5, and also 1996. So, the Bowl Coalition helped out the situation. Then we went to the BCS on through the rest of the 1990s. But this is not just a history book. We take the results of all these seasons and we fast forward into the various playoff eras. So it's an interesting read. We hope you'll like it. And you can get it on Amazon, Disputed National Champions. And we have left the link in the chat, near the top of the chat as well. All right, let's get to week 11. We have left the link to call the show if you would like. And if you'd like us to stay on past the hour, then we appreciate your contributions. We have virtually, at least in terms of the college football that I pay attention to, nothing going on tonight. Let's see who's playing tonight. I would even like to see what's happened the last few days because I have not paid attention to any Tuesday or Wednesday football. So let me make sure that you guys are actually seeing this. You are. So on Tuesday night, Bowling Green beat Central Michigan 23-13. Miami beat Ball State in Maction 27-21. So a couple road wins there. And then more Maction on Wednesday. I would love to know, since I left the worldwide leader, I no longer get their TV ratings, which they're still out there somewhere. Although you're going to be hard pressed to find Maction TV ratings for Tuesday and Wednesdays. But regardless, we would get those every day. That was nice. I always enjoyed that, getting an email that had all of sports TV ratings in one summary, not just the ESPN, but all the ESPN networks. And then beyond that, Fox and everybody else, and getting those every day. But I don't know what I can't even recall what these MAC games did when I was there. I'm thinking they did somewhere in depending if they were on ESPN2, then they would tend to do maybe a 0.6 to a 0.8 rating, which translates to, it used to be about 1.3 million per. My math is going to be way off because things have changed so much, because a rating point used to be about 1.3 million per rating point. So if you had like 600, if you had a 0.6 rating, that was about 800,000 views. But now the universe, meaning the cable universe, has shrunk so much. This is going back to when there were 114 million TV homes in America. And at its peak, ESPN got to 102 million of the 113 or 114. Now, the last I looked it up, which was a few months ago, ESPN is down to like 71 million homes from a high of 101. They've lost 30% of their audience. So these TV ratings are much different. And then you've got streaming. So that supplements. We never did get a handle on how many people were watching in bars. So anyway, Ohio and Kent State on Wednesday night. Kent loses 41-0. Somebody informed me the other day that Kent is winless. So they're obviously still winless. And Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. No, they beat Western Michigan. There we go, 42-28. And so then tonight we've got, what in the past would be a big game in the group of five. App State at Coastal Carolina. And also we got Tom Herman and FAU taking on East Carolina. Let's see the spread on these games. We've got App State is just a 2.5-point favorite on the road. And I know that they got off to a rough start. So they have obviously righted the ship. I think Coastal Carolina got off to a good start, and maybe they faltered. East Carolina, 7.5-point favorite at home against FAU. All right. We do have a caller on the line. It's our buddy David.
Yes, Green. You do. Yes. First of all, I want to apologize for saying Mark Feinbaum and making that comparison, Mark. You know, I just...
Oh, it went right by me, David. Yeah. You never need to worry about offending me.
You have too nice a hair for that, Mark. That's I just want to say.
Well, if that's the distinction you're going to make, I would think that you could come up with some maybe more meaningful ones. But if we're going to go with the less, the surfacey difference, hey, sure, I'll take it.
Your former colleague, by the way, and coworker there at ESPN.
Well, Paul, if that's what you want to call it, we weren't necessarily rubbing shoulders. The man works in Charlotte, but yes, technically we were both on the payroll. He had a couple more zeros.
That's right.
His salary.
Just a couple more, I'm sure. Yes.
Well, hopefully he didn't have too many more than 2 zeros. Then is he making $100 million? Anyway, go ahead.
Chances are he's probably overpaid, Mark.
Yeah, well, there's little doubt to that. And I don't have any disdain for Paul Feinbaum like a lot of people do. I'm mixed on him. There are some things that he does and says, and I think there's a skill set that's lacking out of him, but I don't have quite the disdain or feel him to be quite as useless as a lot of people do.
I think it's part of a little bit shtick, but you know what I mean? That's what I used to think Mark May was, but he's just trying to kind of chide people a little bit, but
yeah.
All right, I didn't get a chance to talk about the college football rankings. I did want to get to that. I know that you had a show over the weekend. I want to get into it, Mark. First of all, I mean, I can see. I actually think Ohio State's pretty deserved at number 2. I do want to start there. I don't think there's any doubt that Oregon should be 1. Very little doubt about that. I do think, because obviously, I mean, they've got two solid wins. If you want to take the Boise State win, into consideration, although a very close game, and obviously beating us in a close game. How did you see the Georgia Ohio State debate? I just want to get your thoughts because I didn't get a chance to watch the show. Very busy day that day, so I didn't get a chance to.
Yeah, so I'm understanding now where we fall on the priority list for David, but that's
Oh,
okay.
come on, that's a cheap shot, Mark.
So I will say it this way: that I did not hear what either the commentators, Herb Street, and the rest of them had to say, and I did not hear the response from the committee to explain. But Ohio State's had one bad effort, and that's, of course, the Nebraska game. Georgia looked pretty bad against Kentucky, and that continues to be a worse and worse situation on the Kentucky side. So you're talking about a 1-6 conference team. And of course, just even this past weekend against Florida, would have
What if
loved to have
Florida's
seen
quarterback
PJ.
doesn't get hurt, Mark?
Yeah.
What if Lagaway doesn't get hurt in that
Yeah,
game?
they had a touchdown lead at half. They were tied into the fourth quarter. So, yeah, the Georgia issues are starting to concern me, or would if I was a Georgia fan, because I do think that they're starting to put together a trend of lackluster play. The Mississippi State game, I know that wasn't real pretty. And so have they really played? Alabama is certainly not Alabama of the last close to 15 years. So it's not like that this was some meeting of the titans of college football and they lost by a score after this great comeback. Well, they lost to a good Alabama team, but the worst one we've probably seen in most of the last 15 years. So they had the big game at Texas. So they've got Georgia beat Texas more convincingly than Ohio State beat Penn State. Both games were on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be Georgia's one bullet point on their side over Ohio State, in my estimation. But the Buckeyes have been much more consistent and more dominant and obviously then the loss for Ohio State on Ohio State's side is a much cleaner, better loss. A game that was competitive all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And we know the ending and how close Ohio State was versus Georgia being completely run out of the building the first half. Now they put on this big comeback, but again, Alabama, until proven otherwise, is not an elite team this year.
I agree. Kirby Smart's last 4 losses are to one program, so I think that says a lot right there. And they were playing in Tuscaloosa, so you should take that into consideration. And that might have been I would like to think that's a far different Alabama team than the one that lost to Vanderbilt, but I digress. I just want to say, kind of looking forward for both of these teams, Mark, and kind of the games that they've got on the upcoming part of the schedule. If you think about it, obviously Ohio State's next big test is going to be Indiana. And I'm never going to discount the rivalry game, but that's not going to be a high quality win this year. We all know that. And then they would have, they get through those two, then they, of course, would have the rematch with Oregon in the Big Ten title game. My question for you would be, what if, and let's just put it out there, Georgia is able to get through this gauntlet of Ole Miss, Tennessee, and let's say they play a one-loss Texas team in the SEC title game, and give that Texas team their second loss. Okay? How much better of a resume do you think that will look than Ohio State's resume if Ohio State was able to beat Oregon in a rematch and would have a win over Oregon, a win over Penn State, and a win over Indiana?
Okay, so Ohio State would still have the better loss, but in
Yeah.
terms of wins, Georgia beat Texas twice. Otherwise, Texas is 11-2.
Right.
Georgia beat Alabama. No, they beat Ole Miss.
Right.
who would be a 9-3 team. And what else did I miss there?
Tennessee. Let's say they beat a
Tennessee.
10-2
Tennessee.
Tennessee team.
Versus Ohio State beating 12-1 Oregon, 11-1 Penn State, 10-2, 11-1 Indiana.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's so incredibly close. So you're looking for the number 1 seed.
Yeah, that would be the debate at that point. That would be the debate at that point. And that's what I found interesting. I said at the beginning of the year, and to show that I guess I'm not biased, because I said in my preseason playoff predictions that I went over with Mark Rogers that I had Georgia's only loss was at Tuscaloosa, and that they would beat Texas twice and give Texas their only 2 losses. Now, I had no idea Indiana was going to be this good. So that data point is, I think, going to really help out the Buckeyes here. So I had Georgia as the 1 seed and then Ohio State as the 2 seed at the end of the year.
So at least Ohio State got to avenge its loss.
Mm-hmm.
And the loss was on the road. Georgia's loss on the road against a lesser team. Again, it's a not a significantly better win or loss for Ohio State versus Georgia, but it's a better loss. Let's also, the deeper we get into these schedules, then we're going to get into a non-conference comparison of, sure, we all saw Clemson on Saturday night. This is not a very good football team.
Yeah.
But they are still going to be probably 9-3, 8-4. And Georgia Tech's going to be 7-5, 6-6. So at least Georgia played 2 decent. This Clemson team still ranked in the top 25 in this playoff committee's ranking.
What do you think Iowa goes, though, Mark?
And Ohio State has nothing.
What do you think Iowa ends up? Do you think Iowa ends up 9-3?
Ohio State's not playing Iowa.
No, I'm saying as far as I'm listing like the list of wins here.
I'm
Mark.
sorry, with Ohio State beating Iowa. Yeah. Well, Iowa, they're not ranked now. They should run the table, which would put them. So Iowa, Clemson. So maybe that's a wash. And I would hope Georgia Tech wouldn't lift. They've already lost 4 games. They got Miami this weekend. They will lose to Georgia, or otherwise we don't have a conversation. So they're 6-6. I would hope that I want the entire schedule to be dissected because it's that important, but it's just a tiny blip on the radar, so it shouldn't even matter. I would say under those circumstances, I believe, again, let's see, Oregon, Penn State, Indiana,
right,
versus Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee. I've got to give it to Georgia.
Really? I wasn't going to say Mark Feinbaum again. Pardon me. But if Ohio State gives Oregon, Indiana, and Penn State their only losses of the year, Mark, that's legitimately 3 top 10 wins there. Maybe a couple of top 5 wins there.
How many top 10 wins would Ohio State have?
They would have 3, and including
Georgia
2 top 5.
How many?
Well, okay,
4.
they would have. Yeah, I don't know. Ole Miss. They would have Texas twice, and then they would have
Tennessee and Ole Miss.
Ole Miss is like 11, I thought, right now, or 12.
Yeah.
Okay, not quite top 10, but yeah, I was going to say that's pushing top 10 because Ole Miss, according to the rank,
does it matter?
Well, they're 16 right now, according to CFP rankings.
Who's 16?
Ole Miss.
Oh, okay.
According to CFP, they've got a dud loss out there that's really costing them. Well, we talked about that. Both of their games they easily could have won. By the way, you haven't made predictions on the games yet this week, have you, Mark?
No.
I'm close to a pretty. I've seen a lot of people picking Ole Miss this week. By the way, I don't know if you've seen a few people picking Ole Miss this week, but
yeah, what was I watching? I don't know. I was driving by one of our shows and heard somebody pick Ole Miss. Yeah.
Would you?
If that happens, that tells me that Ole Miss, the improvement on the offensive and defensive lines has been significant in one season, and or Georgia's has been their decline has been significant because those two teams did not belong in the same field together last year.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, I thought that's when Georgia was really starting to peak, at that particular period of time. Okay, so let's look at the rest of these rankings here because I didn't get a chance to get in there with you. Is Indiana underranked at 8?
Yes.
I tend to agree as well. Where would you have them? I know there's the Mark Rogers top 25 that makes sense. I get that. But if we can hate to set that aside because it's very, very important. I understand that. But just in your own view, where do you think the CFP rankings should have them?
Well, anybody that's listening that does watch the top 25 that actually makes sense would then consider me to be a hypocrite unless I explain one thing, that if I varied at all off of that, then what is that ranking? Well, that ranking is a complete resume ranking, which I think that this should be a complete resume ranking. However, the committee also takes into consideration an eyeball test or an evaluation of talent. And so, yeah, I may compromise a little bit and drop Indiana, but I've got them number 3 in the country.
Wow.
That's where they are in my top 25.
Okay.
They're number 3.
Okay. Yeah, I think I could make a case. I could have them at 5. I could really make a case you could have them at 5.
If Ohio State and Georgia had their exact resume, who would be saying what about where they should be ranked?
Right. Because what is the one thing here's the thing, Mark. It's one thing if, obviously if you play good football teams and win close games, people kind of get that. I mean, I think Ohio State really outplayed Penn State, but Ohio State beating Penn State at Penn State by a touchdown. Okay. I mean, people get that. Nobody's going to say, oh, man, yeah, you should have gone to Penn State and won by like 4 touchdowns. It's like, okay, yeah, you went to Penn State, won by a touchdown. That's a good, solid football team, top 10 football team that you beat by a touchdown on their home field. What Indiana is doing to the cupcake schedule that they're getting is the right thing to be doing, which they're thumping it, Mark. They're thumping it.
Yeah.
And I think they got to get some, I think they deserve far more love than they're getting. Our buddy Joel Klatt talked about it. I saw him tweet about that. By the way, Ohio State fans, I think, have a thing out for Joel Klatt nowadays. Why, I don't know. He did pick us to win the national championship, but I digress. In any case.
Well, to back up your point, if we ran through the top 10, and we will right now, everybody has lousy performances. So besides the losses, Oregon, the first 2 weeks, although the Boise State game looks much better than it did at the time, but still they struggled against Idaho and Boise State. Ohio State struggled against Nebraska. For Georgia, it's been Kentucky, Florida, to an extent, Mississippi State. For Miami, it's been Virginia Tech and Cal, and Texas, Vanderbilt. But they're a decent team. But they also struggled. So if based on trying to compare apples to apples, Indiana's performance against Vandy, you would guess would be more dominant just because they've taken teams that you could maybe put in the Vandy bucket, Washington, somebody like that. And they've played complete games. Penn State struggled against Bowling Green and USC. Tennessee struggled against Florida. They were taken to overtime. BYU really slopped around against Oklahoma State a couple weekends ago and barely won. And they might have another game like that. That's not coming to mind. Notre Dame. Really can't think of a struggle Notre Dame's had in any of their wins.
Well, they did have a close game the first game of the year against Texas A&M, which is, I guess, is to be expected.
Well, I'm talking about against bad
teams.
bad teams,
Yeah.
just okay teams.
They just they lost to a bad team though. I mean, that's their thing.
Yes. So Indiana is the only team that's played a complete game every time out.
Yeah, I agree. Now, do you also feel BYU is underranked, or you think that number 9 is about right?
Well, I don't think that they're the ninth best team in the country, but
No, yeah.
well, I've got BYU higher. Again, I'm ranking strictly a resume, so it's hard for me to pull away from what I do. Like,
See,
I don't think that we should be judging talent. I think we should just be judging results.
you think the CFP is just continuing to, let's give the blue bloods their love and put them up there and do that and not looking close enough of that. I think that's clearly being said with this here, Mark.
If Ohio State had the same exact scores against the same exact teams as Indiana, they would not be number 8.
Sure. I agree. I agree. I think that I mean, just look at those teams. I mean, those are like the top programs. You're choosing the blue bloods again. And I mean, hey, my favorite team is one. So what do you want me to say? But I mean, I think the disrespect for Indiana and BYU, especially Indiana, is real.
Does Alabama really have a better resume than Texas A&M?
No, no, I don't think so. I mean, Texas A&M's 2 losses was at South Carolina and, at home to Notre Dame, which was a close game, could have gone either way, but they legitimately lost to a top 10 or 11 team on their field, but in a 1-possession game.
Alabama's best win is?
Well, Georgia, of course.
Georgia. And then...
But losing to Vanderbilt, I mean, losing at Tennessee in a close game, I mean, there's not a lot of disgrace in that, I'll say. But the Vanderbilt loss still kind of sticks out there, although this is an improved Vanderbilt team. But
well, Vanderbilt's about as in the same ballpark as South Carolina.
Yeah, fair point.
And Alabama played a closer game.
Yeah, and I guess you'd say A&M lost to Notre Dame at home, and then Alabama lost at Tennessee.
And I'm just not coming up with, let's see, Alabama beat Georgia, Missouri. Is that about it? Can't think of anybody else substantial. Wisconsin.
Right.
Texas A&M beat LSU. Arkansas. All these teams are so close.
Yeah.
As you fade into the teens, it's pretty close. So
Actually,
I didn't necessarily prove anything one way or the other.
I did want to get to the SEC in a minute. Before I got to that, Mark, I did want to look at the kind of the way, proposed bracket matchups here, Mark, because I find them fascinating.
Yep.
What is your thought about that process? Because, this is obviously a real possibility of the Buckeyes if we were to lose yet another heartbreaker to Oregon and get the 5th seed. Now, there's an interesting one, Mark. We would get the 5th seed over a 2-loss Texas. A 2-loss Ohio State would get the 5th seed over a 2-loss Texas, right?
I would sure hope so.
Yeah, we got a better resume than they do. Okay, so what do you think about that 5 path, though? Because you're going to, let's say you get Boise in the 5-12 game, then you get the 4 seed in the, in the 5-4, quarterfinal game. I mean, you could have a fairly still good path to the semis there.
Well, the 5 seed is the place to be.
Yeah,
I've
that's
said
right.
that since this was constructed. However, I will admit that Boise State team is better than most top group of 5 teams that will be playing in this field.
Right. I don't want to be too arrogant here, but let's see them come to Columbus in December. Okay.
Well, I don't think December, July, that really matters. They're coming from Boise, Idaho.
Right, but nevertheless, I don't see them Okay. And I know they probably have the best running back and a guy that's going to be a Heisman finalist. I get all that. And I've watched them play, and I think they're a solid football team. They very easily could have beat Oregon. I mean, they lost by 3 points to Oregon. We lost by 1 point to Oregon.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I guess to more clarify my point,
yeah.
that during this entire 14 playoff, the group of 5 best team got screwed, never made it until Cincinnati. And I find it ironic that at the point that there would not be group of 5 teams making the playoff, that the group of 5 was stronger than it is now. Now, most of the top group of 5 schools have been plucked up by the Power 5. So the group of 5 has been diminished, but now they're given a automatic seat at the table.
Right.
Now, last year, that would have been Liberty. That would have been a complete joke.
Sure.
This year, this Boise State team, I think that they're a legitimately good team, and I think they're one of the 30 or 35 best teams in the country.
See, I'm starting to warm up a little bit to the 12-team playoff. I don't know if you are. I think we were both of the believers in the 8 being the right number. You were an 8 guy. I was an 8 guy, right, Mark? I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. I just didn't want to see buys, but they handled the buys by making the conference championship games more important.
I mean,
That's
so
how they approached it.
is it fair to say Mark Rogers is warming up to the 12-team playoff?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
I kind of am too. I was kind of looking at it here, Mark. Fascinating matchups. That maybe Alabama versus Texas, Notre Dame versus Penn State, Indiana versus Tennessee.
Now, this is where Indiana gets screwed because, of course, we know none of these are going to hold. But if it does, Indiana, Tennessee, that 8-9 call that the committee's going to make is going to be huge.
Mm-hmm.
As is maybe even it stretches to 7-10 or maybe even 6-11, but certainly 8-9, where you are sending a team on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be a lot of scrutiny, and I'm going to take note of this because I'll be one that's going to scrutinize this 8-9 differentiation, because they're sending Indiana to go play in front of 100,000 Tennessee fans that are going to be at fever pitch playing their first meaningful football game in forever, versus Tennessee having to travel to Bloomington, Indiana to play. That's a big swing right there.
Yeah, here's the thing. I don't know if you ever catch Doug Maurice, who used to cover the Buckeyes for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Really good podcast. I'm not trying to give other people shout outs, but it's called Kings of the North. Basically covers Northern football. Made a really good point. I don't know if you ever catch his show, but he made a really excellent point. Do you know what the point swing is between if that game's in Indiana and that game's in Knoxville?
No.
He says it's like 6 or 7 points.
Well, if it's the standard point spread favor status given to the home team, then it's going to be 6, because it's going to be the 3-point swing going from neutral site to home and then to the other home. So that makes sense.
Well, see, I was
any kind of great discovery. Did he just make that up, or did Vegas run point spreads on these hypothetical matchups?
I think he took a look at the numbers on it. I always thought, just real quick, that the built-in home field advantage was 3 points, not 7 points, Mark.
Well, my question was always, are you talking about 3, meaning going from a neutral site to one home? Or are you talking about swinging all the way from one home to the other?
Yeah, I thought home field advantage one way or another was only worth the 3. Not worth something like 7.
Meaning Ohio State was a 3-point favorite at Oregon. They would be a 6-point favorite at home.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Not they would be a 6-point favorite at a neutral site and a 9-point favorite at home.
Right. Not that it goes from like a pick 'em to 6 or 7 points is what I'm saying. Yeah. It would go, right. It increases from 3 to 6. Yeah. 3-point advantage. Right. Yeah. I find it to be interesting. I'm wondering if we're going to have also teams, the left out and the cold teams. I'm wondering about too, if we're going to have, like we would always talk about who's going to be number 5, but who's going to be number 13?
What I want to see. This is what I want to see, David, among other things, to see this committee squirm, is that we've got 4 from the SEC, we've got 4 from the Big Ten, and then only the champions going in from the ACC and the Big 12. What if SMU runs the table, beats Miami in the ACC championship game? Miami's 12-1.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's no way that they're going to drop from I think they're the number 4 team in the country. They would be the 3 seed right now. And this is where people, I don't think anybody out there is confused that watches college football, but you just got to keep that in mind, that no longer do the rankings just convey and correlate strictly to the seed. You've got to readjust everything. So Ohio State's the 2 ranking, number 2 ranked team, but they falls at the 5 seed.
Right.
That takes up a spot from the SEC or the Big Ten. And then you've got the possibility that whether it's Colorado, Iowa State, run the table, win the Big 12 championship game, and BYU goes into the Big 12 championship game undefeated. Now at number 9, let's say they're still at number 9 going into the Big 12 championship game at 12-0 and lose. Do they fall and miss?
See, yeah, you can see where Miami's already pumped up to 4. That, if they go undefeated at 4, maybe they even move up to 3.
Yep.
And they're 12-0 and number 3 in the rankings. And see, that's what I had them at the beginning of the year. I actually had them as like a 10 or 11 seed. I'll go back and look at my preseason, but I had them undefeated, losing to Clemson in the title game, and then both getting in. But Clemson's now floundering, and yeah. I did have an SEC question here before I let you go, Mark. I'm chiding the SEC. I do agree with your overall point about, top to bottom in the middle of the SEC still being, the best conference. I get where you're coming from, but kind of a couple points here. The high end of the SEC just does not, I'm sorry, it does not comport to being your older brother's SEC. Maybe because I just don't feel we're seeing the best version of Alabama, a good LSU team, but not a really good LSU team. This isn't the best version of Georgia we've seen over the last few years either. Just maybe it's the high end for me, not looking like the old SEC. That, I don't know. Your thoughts, Mark?
Well, the first thing I would ask is for us to play out the full season.
Okay.
Let's see these teams play playoff games.
Okay, fair. That's fair.
But I don't see any difference right now.
Eye test, Mark. You watch a lot of college football. You've watched a lot of college football. You've watched a lot of SEC football for a long period of time. How do these teams comport to, the recent versions?
I would say that if we went through the Alabama teams during the CFP era, the 4 team, and the LSU team that won the national championship, and the Georgia teams, those were the main 3 that made it out of the SEC, that you would see them tripping up. And some of the teams that won major bowl games maybe didn't make the playoffs, but won major bowl games and were ranked in the top 10 in the country, that they had their share of slip-ups and ugly games. And I'm thinking about Alabama and Derrick Henry salting away a 19-14 win against like a 5-win Tennessee team.
I remember that.
En route to the 2015 national championship. And I'm thinking of Georgia when they took Alabama to the wire in the 2018 SEC championship game, losing to South Carolina that year. I don't know. I would have to see it, because the Bryce Young Alabama team that came within 4 minutes of beating Georgia to win the national championship, man, they messed around with all sorts of teams that year. LSU wasn't that good. In 2021, they weren't very good at all.
They really could have lost to Auburn that year, I believe.
Auburn, if Auburn would have, clock management would have been decent. A 5-win Auburn team. Arkansas played them tough that year.
I don't know. just some eye test. And I watch a lot of SEC football, and I've watched a lot of SEC football over the years. Maybe it's just that I'm not seeing a dominant SEC team or as dominant at the top end of the SEC teams that I've seen in the past. That's where I was going with it. Now, I agree top to bottom. I totally get your point. I actually have to concede your point to you on that. I would ask this question, though, Mark. How many teams legitimately this year could you see winning the SEC?
Georgia,
Okay.
Texas, Tennessee. I really have no faith or little faith in LSU. I don't think, even though they have a path that's right in front of them, control their own destiny. Texas A&M. I don't think that they would have to get through. Of course, the next two games they should be fine, but or the next SEC game they got Auburn, but they'd have to beat Texas and then beat somebody else. That's only two games, but I really don't think. I think that those are the three teams that are far and away, both the combination of they're in position to win it and they've got a good enough team to win it. If Alabama was in better position, if they didn't have two losses, I'd put them in that bucket too.
I was going to say, yeah, what if we get back together? Well, I was going to say Saturday night, you and me get together Sunday morning. And, Alabama's coming off of a nice win inside Death Valley. Are you willing to reconsider the things at that point and say maybe there are four teams and maybe Ole Miss, we get together on Sunday, Alabama wins at Death Valley and Ole Miss beats Georgia. Would you be willing to reconsider and say, let's reshuffle the deck?
Yeah.
And maybe there are 4 or 5 teams that could win the SEC this year.
Well, then you've got Ole Miss is going to be tied with Georgia with 2 losses and have the tiebreaker. That completely changes things.
Yeah, you see where I'm going with this, Mark. I think that there's a lot of years where we can only see 2 teams winning the SEC too. This is a year where, and we'll reconvene and have this discussion on Sunday. So I'll add that obvious caveat. But if we come off of that weekend and Ole Miss beats Georgia and Alabama wins at LSU, I dare say we could have 5 teams at that point that could win the SEC.
Yeah, well, we've got 9 teams right now that could win the SEC.
You know where I'm going with this, Mark.
I know where you're going, and
yeah.
If Texas A&M ended up winning the SEC, am I going to be shocked? No, I just don't think that they've got a real strong shot. I don't think they're a good enough football team. Again, I'm going to stay with those 3, and if Alabama had a better record, I would put them as a 4th.
Okay. We'll see what Death Valley looks like, and when we get back together. All right, my friend. Hey, you doing call-in show again tomorrow night before the Friday night action?
Yeah, we got Iowa and UCLA going at it, so I don't want to miss that one.
Yes, that should be fun. Well, yeah, you'd think we'd have slightly better on Friday night. We were doing so good earlier in the year.
I'm actually serious when I say that. I don't want to miss that game. I'm going live before the game. I'm not going live. We're not going live at 3:00 in the morning because they're playing late.
Okay.
And yeah, I want to see that game. I knew you were taking it as a joke, but shoot, yeah, I love these Friday night games when they actually consistently schedule them. I don't know why there are gaps in the schedule like last week and maybe even the weekend before where there's no game.
Yeah, last week I think we agreed was a little bit of a weaker docket, but
yeah, you're being kind, David. It was trash. It was horrible.
Well, I was probably being too politically correct there, Mark.
It was pathetic. All right, David.
All right, Mark. You take care. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
You too. Bye-bye. So we need a commissioner in college football or a governing body to look over the entire schedule because every conference schedules itself, and so they're not working together. Therefore, on some Friday nights, we had a couple Friday nights where we actually had 3 decent games, power conference games. We'd have like 2 in the early window competing against each other, one on Fox, one on ESPN. Then there'd be an ESPN late night game that was decent. And then last weekend, and maybe even the Friday before that, we had nothing. Makes no sense. All right. Defiance on the line here at the Voice of College Football.
Hello, Mark.
How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah, I want to talk about Florida's coaching situation. I know they just said Napier will be there in 2025. I find it puzzling a little bit due to the results he had on the field and his record. I know the buyout's $25 million if they were to let him go after this year. What are your kind of thoughts on them keeping him until 2025 potentially?
So I got to say, I saw that headline and I clicked on the link and I was looking for exactly what you just addressed, whether that was some kind of false vote of confidence, and then they would go ahead and pull the plug at the end of the season, or if they actually stated in there that he's going to be back for 2025.
Yeah, I read a little bit into it. And I looked it up how much his buyout is, and it's like the second highest right now behind Jimbo Fisher's buyout. So again, I don't know if they're just trying to keep him so the buyout goes lower and lower. But to me, it really makes no sense at all from a standpoint of them being competitive under him.
Well, it makes no sense if they've given up on him and they're just trying to save some money. But it makes sense if they actually think that there's a possibility that he can turn things around.
I mean, yeah, you give him time. Again, he's 15 and 18.
They got the worst of both worlds in a sense, because they didn't get a decisive victory out of him. They didn't get a decisive, wow, I proved I can do the job. We are currently 8-2, nor did they just completely collapse and not play for him. They've played fairly well. I think they're 4-4 right now.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're kind of in the middle right now between the results and everything on the field. But I don't know. I just think if you want to stick with the guy, stick with the guy. Again, I'm not the athletic directors. I'm not the people working at the university that go, behind the scenes and look at, everything. And, so I just really just think that, again, I personally just would wait it out and then say, yes, we want to keep him 2025 or no. I don't get why in the middle of the season you say unless, again, there's something behind the scenes where they're saying, telling him that, no, we're going to give you one more year to see what you can do. Again, I would wait until the end of the season to officially make that statement to the world.
Well, they might be looking to pull together a recruiting class.
Mm-hmm. In that case, you would want to say we're keeping Napier at least in 2025. But then after that, we're reevaluating the 3 years he's been here.
Well, yeah, National Signing Days in 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of recruits being courted by other teams who are going to negatively recruit against Billy Napier and his lame duck status, they may have wanted to get ahead of that. And so thinking they've seen enough, they've seen 8 games this season. They've got 4 left. Florida State's horrible. They should win that game. And they've played well enough against decent teams, good teams on the schedule that, again, they apparently have made the decision that he's staying and they wanted to get it announced so that they can positively recruit and keep the class that he's formed, which I think it's got to be in the top 10 in the country.
Yeah, I don't know what that is currently right now. I mean, again, you do have a good point about recruiting wise. But then I would ask you this question: if Napier does leave or does get fired next year potentially, do you see them looking at a coach in the SEC potentially to replace him, like a Lane Kiffin type coach or somebody like that?
So I'm looking at Florida's recruiting class right there. I was surprised at how bad it is, actually. Anyway, do I think what?
Like, would you think Florida will be looking maybe in a conference for a next head coach if Napier doesn't stay, doesn't be the head coach after 25?
Oh, we're already going ahead more than a year.
Yeah, I'm just saying hypothetically.
There's going to be so many things that are going to change. Why did they need to look in the conference?
Oh no, I'm just asking. Do you think they would? I'm just asking. Do you think they would?
I think that they're looking for a good head coach. If in fact he doesn't make it through next year, I don't think anybody's necessarily looking to stay in the conference. I don't see any consistency to that across college football. I would say that that's actually a rarity that a team is hiring a coach inside the conference.
Mm-hmm. So Lane Kiffin, you would really consider Lane Kiffin potentially for that job if it opens up?
Oh, I think that they would consider Lane Kiffin. They would love to have Lane Kiffin, but it doesn't mean just because Lane Kiffin's in the SEC. I'm not understanding the connection between staying in the SEC.
No, I was asking if they
they're
look in
going for the best
conference.
coaches.
Yeah, I'm just saying would they look in conference for a candidate and then look elsewhere too? I'm just saying, yeah, I'm just all
I
saying
think
would
they're
they look.
looking from Maine to Los Angeles.
Yeah, I was just asking. I was just curious about how these teams figure out what kind of coaching they want. If they look at the conference most of the time, to see what the options are, and then they look elsewhere.
I think that there's some level of regional bias, if that's what you want to say, or conference bias to coordinator hires. There's a long history of SEC defensive coordinators that have hung around that conference and pretty much played merry-go-round and coached just about every team in the conference as a defensive coordinator. So maybe there's something to that, just hiring guys that are familiar with the personnel, familiar with the other teams and how to stop those offenses and those teams. But in terms of a head coaching hire, there is no connection between. I can't even think of anybody that's gone from one conference school to the next. Who would that be?
Yeah. Probably not recent times, maybe back in the day.
Yeah. And we're thinking about there must be 12 to 15 coaches that change spots every year. And we can't even think of anyone.
I know there've been candidates for jobs and they haven't gotten it. I know that for sure. There's been coaches from one conference, tied in one job, and then, another guy comes in. So, I mean, there's that. But I just didn't know if Florida, would look at Lane Kiffin and be like, we're in Florida. We're recruiting hot out of Florida. We'll give you all, what you want, what you need. I feel like sometimes that's what a coach wants.
Well, absolutely. I think he's what at least people consider. I don't know if this has anything to do with the Florida administration, but people consider him to be the number one target. I don't think that has anything to do with him being at Ole Miss. That has to do with him being successful.
But what Ole Miss kind of factor into it, though, him, being in, the conference a little bit to some extent.
Again,
that he's played against SEC competition.
Dan Mullen, I just thought of one. Think of all the I understand what you're saying, but history tells us that has nothing to do with it. You would think that there would be, when there are only 3 other conferences to choose from, and as of a year ago, 4 other conferences to choose from, you would think it would be more frequent that a coach would go from one team to another in the same conference, but it almost never happens. I can think of one. I just came up with one that hit me right in the face, obviously, when we're talking about Florida. Dan Mullen.
Yeah, you have a point, but again, I couldn't think of Mullen at first. That was kind of what I was kind of hinting at. Will the Florida kind of do something like that again?
Yeah, but again, I don't think Dan Mullen going to Florida had anything to do with Dan Mullen coaching in the SEC.
No, he just built him around a program.
Yeah, well, he was already there, so they were already familiar with Dan Mullen from him being with Urban Meyer, for one thing. And he was successful at Mississippi State, but he could have been successful at Kansas State or Illinois.
Yeah. So again, I see your point, and I'm like, I personally right now had Lane Kiffin potentially as a candidate for the Auburn job if Hugh Freeze got fired or whatever. I think Hugh Freeze is going to probably stay there for a little bit longer because again, it's Auburn. What happened to Brian Harsin, but Lane Kiffin will probably be in a couple conversations for head coaching jobs potentially next year, depending on which ones open up and if he's willing to go after what he's building here in Ole Miss.
Yeah. So at the end of this season, for any major job that's open, there's going to be a few names that are going to be thrown out there. Matt Campbell's always out there as a candidate. And now that his team and program has bounced back, he's going to even more so be a candidate. Whether he's a true candidate, I don't know, but he's going to be talked about by people like us. But Lane Kiffin's going to be at the top of the list, and Kurt Signetti's going to be on the list. Those guys come to mind pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. And there'll be a couple of G5 guys that are on there too as well for some of the mid-major jobs. So, in
terms of anybody else overachieving in the Power Five, those are typically the guys that, the G5 guys that are dominating at their level. It was Jeff Traylor at this time last year, having another successful year at Texas San Antonio, but not so much now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Florida does in 2025. Again, I know they gave him another year to figure it out a little bit. I mean, when you're playing a tough schedule this year, 5 wins, 6 wins is probably what they were expected to win no matter what, potentially. I mean, 4 wins right now in the halfway mark is pretty good. Again, I know some people didn't have Florida even winning 4 games, depending on their schedule. So, I mean, winning 4 games right now, being 4-4, and being competitive against teams that are currently either competing for the playoff or in the playoff bracket right now. So, I mean, you do have to give him some credit to some extent in the short little time he's been there. And then, secondly, I want to talk a little bit about the Indiana-Michigan matchup this Saturday.
We got another one. We got 2 more. Yeah, so we got two other there in the chat. Steve Spurrier went from Florida but I'm not going to count him necessarily. He had an NFL job. I'm talking about going from one school to another. So we don't have it with Spurrier because he coached in the NFL between jobs. And we don't have it with Saban because he coached in the NFL between jobs. So again, I can only come up with one guy that went from one conference school to another. Yeah, he's the only guy I can come up. I'm sure there are other ones, and they'll hit me at some point. But yeah, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I was wanting to talk about the Indiana and a Michigan game on Saturday. I think the defense will show up, especially against Michigan's quarterback room. Michigan has no quarterback play at all. So I think the game will be competitive, but I think, again, we come out with the win. We probably keep it close at first, like we always have last couple of games. But I think at the end, we would run away with the game, in my opinion, and be 10-0 for the first time ever in program history.
Well, certainly Vegas loves Indiana way beyond anything that I anticipated. And I get it because Michigan's no different. You know, if you took away the Michigan name, they're no different in how they've played than, let's say, Washington and fairly close to Michigan State, not that much better. And we saw the results of those games. So I get it. I just, I wouldn't be the one to give 14.5 points to Michigan myself.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think it's gonna be closer than what the last couple of games have been. I mean, yeah, Michigan doesn't have the talent, but Michigan, I think, is better than Michigan State, better than Washington, even though they lost to Washington. I think they're a little bit more competitive, I would imagine, against some of the teams we've played already.
You don't think Michigan has as much talent as Indiana?
No, I'm saying I'm saying in terms of the games we played in the season so far, I'm saying Michigan's probably up there in terms of talent.
Well, I would guess that Michigan has more NFL players on its roster than Indiana does.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing. I'm a loyal fan, yes, but I'm also realistic about the talent it is on both sides of the team. Yes, I think Michigan does have more talent. That's what I'm saying. Michigan's probably the real first true test for us.
Yeah.
I would say Nebraska, but you see what happened against Nebraska.
Yeah.
I mean, they can say Michigan's a test. I'm saying Michigan's a test, but if we blow out Michigan, really is going to be who is the test. Is Ohio State even the test? It's going to be very interesting this weekend to see if we can keep up with Michigan or Michigan keep up with us.
So, well, we're going to put that comment in quotes. That's quite a statement you just made there, Defiant. That is Ohio State even a challenge?
Mark, again, they said Nebraska was. And look what happened against Nebraska. Yes, I know it was at home.
Nebraska, Ohio State. Nebraska, Ohio State.
Yeah, I know that one was a home. And again, it was saying, oh, yeah, Nebraska will give Indiana a little struggle. But again, we blew them out. And I mean, yes, I'm confident that we can win out. But again, who is really going to be the first true test for us? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I am leaning toward Michigan being the first true test. And then the question is going to be not, is Ohio State a test for Indiana? It's going to be, is Indiana a test for Ohio State?
Mm-hmm. Which will be the case because, we're at Columbus. We're coming in probably 10-0, whatever, coming off this big, huge streak. We have everything in front of us. We can win out, go to the Big Ten championship, whatever. Yeah, I think we're the test for Ohio State. I don't think Ohio State's a test for us in terms of the talent that we have and the talent they have. I mean, our test will just try and make the game competitive at that point.
Wonder if anybody's thrown out any kind of an early point spread on that game. Right now, that's about what I expected. There are 3 sports books that have betting lines in Ohio State, Indiana. What do you think the point spread is?
More than 10.5.
9.5.
Well, I was close.
Yeah, you were.
I mean, again, that could change. Again, that could change during this weekend. What happens between I'm sure Ohio State's going to beat Purdue. There's no way Purdue's beating Ohio State. And I mean, our game will be the difference between if that spread goes lower or if it goes higher.
All right, Defiant. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mark.
You too. Have a good night.
You too.
Our buddy Defiant stopping by to talk some Indiana football. We are happy for Defiant and all the Indiana fans out there, Jeffrey, because when have you ever had anything to be happy about? 2020, yes, to a certain extent, but who was really celebrating in 2020 because everybody played like 2.5 quarters. So nobody really played a season. Indiana went 6-1. They lost to Ole Miss in a bowl game. They almost made it to the Big Ten championship. And then, of course, they were coming off 2019. That was a nice 8-4 season, lost a bowl game to Tennessee. But for Indiana, that was a great season. But now this is not just, they're having a nice season. Look at them. They're going to go to the Gator Bowl. No, they are playing for a Big Ten championship, and they are playing for what seems to be just about a certain college football playoff appearance, and they should be ranked higher than 9th in the country in the CFP rankings. But we all do appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Thanks for stopping by. We'll be live before the Iowa-UCLA game on Friday night.